4 unanswered goals by the Blackhawks in the third period leads to their first preseason victory. I'll break down all the best players and key takeaways from St. Louis.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, Blackhawks fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm Jack Bushman. Check me out on X at Jack Bushman 2, but make sure to follow my strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey so you can get all of the latest Blackhawks news and updates. And just a quick heads up that today's episode is sponsored by FanDuel. Go and download the FanDuel app now or visit FanDuel.com to get $300 worth of bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. All right, Blackhawks fans, kicking off today's show, I think that comeback victory last night in St. Louis deserves a holy jump in honor of Darren Pang's old gig with the St. Louis Blues. What a comeback victory from the Blackhawks last night in enemy territory, down 2-0. Not really looking all that good in the opening 30 minutes, some sloppy passes, some bad defensive zone breakdowns, but an incredible fight and great resiliency shown by this Blackhawks group last night that was without most of their NHLers, while St. Louis iced a majority of theirs, including Robert Thomas, Braden Shen, Colton Parayko, Cam Fowler, Jordan Binnington got the start in net. They also had top prospects Jimmy Snuggerud, Dalibor Dvorsky, and Justin Cabinot all in the lineup as well. And listen, the Blackhawks, they had more NHLers than they did in their preseason opener playing last night with Connor Murphy, Jason Dickinson, Sam Lafferty was in the lineup once again. So was Dominic Toninato, who I'll get to here in just a second. Ilya Mikheyev played. Matt Grzelcyk, a veteran, even though he's just starting his tenure with the Blackhawks, currently on a PTO, he also was in the lineup. But at the same point in time, just comparing who St. Louis put out there on their roster and what the Blackhawks had, I think this is a pretty impressive comeback that the Blackhawks put together last night. So definitely wanted to talk through all my key takeaways, standout players, and everything in between. First and foremost, I got to give a lot of credit, and I wanted to start with this group for a reason. A lot of credit, I think, goes to the fourth line of Dominic Toninato, Martin Misiak, and Gavin Hayes. Misiak, by the way, playing the center ice position. Don't believe he did that consistently with the Erie Otters over the last 2 years, kind of bounced in between center and the wing spot. I feel like he's more likely going to become a winger long-term, but did think that was noteworthy that he was down the middle instead of Dominic Toninato. But what a performance from that trio last night on the Hawks' fourth line, even prior to them getting the scoring going in the third period for the visitors. I thought they really changed the tides of this game with some strong shifts that they put together consecutively in the offensive zone, because up to that point in time, the Blackhawks really struggled to maintain time in the Blues end. They were really struggling to just have consecutive shifts down there. And I thought the game kind of turned once that trio, the fourth line, started getting it going on the cycle, started getting some good possession down in the offensive zone. And I think that kind of kickstarted the rest of the Blackhawks roster throughout the final 30 minutes of that game. And then, of course, Dominic Toninato kicks off the scoring with what looked like a harmless-looking wrister from out on top of the right dot, winds up banking in off of a Blues defender and finding the back of the net to cut the Blackhawks deficit in half. And then just 27 seconds later, and what I love in particular is head coach Jeff Blashill going right back to that fourth line after they had been the ones, like I said, that kind of kick-started this comeback effort. What does Blashill do after they convert for a goal? Well, I will say, I believe Sam Lafferty and Ilya Mikheyev actually jumped on the ice at the time of when Dominic Toninato buried that goal. But still, it was the fourth line who established that pressure in the O-zone, and then Blashill goes right back to him on the next shift, and it ends up paying off. Great hustle shown by Dominic Toninato on kind of just a loose puck. He won a foot race there and centers it quickly to find Gavin Hayes in front of the net. He puts it home, and bang, just like that, this game is suddenly tied up 2-2. huge night from the Blackhawks fourth line. And I got to talk about Martin Misiak as well. Even though he didn't wind up on the stat sheet in this game, definitely thought he made an impact. He finished the game with 3 shots on goal, also had the Blackhawks' second best expected goals for percentage at 5-on-5. Thought there was also a funny moment of he and Dalibor Dvorsky, 2 Slovakian forwards who have played together on the international scene in the past, kind of mixing it up and smiling at each other as they got into a skirmish. But I thought Misiak looked really solid in this game and grinding it out along the boards during those cycles. And for those of you who have been listening or watching the show for the last couple of years, Martin Misiak has kind of had some of these similar performances in the past in the preseason. He's shown some good skills and just overall has really gotten me intrigued. I don't know if he's ever going to be like in a true effective NHLer, but he's got something. I think he still has a little bit of development to go through, but he's shown some flashes during preseason action over these last couple of years and really had a solid game along with Dominic Toninato and Gavin Hayes down there on the fourth line. Also, have to give a massive shout out to Spencer Knight because in the opening half of this game, you know, the Blackhawks actually, in the first few minutes, it was kind of a similar vibe to the preseason opener against the Red Wings. The Blackhawks came out with some good speed. They were playing super aggressive on the puck, but then sloppy play and turnovers just kind of became the narrative that plagued their play a little bit. And the Blues started to find their groove, started to capitalize on some of those giveaways. But Spencer Knight really held down the fort and kept this game in check until the Blackhawks really found their footing in the second half. Made some incredible saves, one in particular, I think it was actually 2, on Pavel Buchnevich, who was left all alone backdoor by Ethan Del Mastro. I'll touch more on that here in just a second. But Spencer Knight, I thought, was incredible all night long in his preseason debut. Ended up stopping 31 of the 33 shots that he faced in order to get the victory. And I think that was just a good reminder, again, of just the type of play that Spencer Knight can provide in between the pipes and why he could really be a huge difference maker for the Blackhawks this season, because we know they're going to have a young defense. There's going to be mistakes. There's going to be hiccups. There's going to be learning curves. There's going to be breakdowns. But if Spencer Knight can, you know, remain poised and calm in net and be the goaltender we know he's capable of being, the Blackhawks, you know, are going to find themselves in some more games because they have a goaltender that I really feel like they can rely on here this season. Spencer Knight showed us some of that last night in St. Louis. A lot of good stuff in his first preseason game. Got to give another shout out as well to Colton Dach, who I thought was excellent in this game last night against the Blues. Played on the top line in his first preseason game on Tuesday against the Detroit Red Wings. I thought it was pretty clear that, you know, his skill just isn't quite at the same level of Connor Bedard and even Lucas Reichel. Those two just a lot more skilled and speedier than Dach is. But he also, in that game against the Red Wings, showed some of his, you know, power forward abilities, his physicality, getting into skirmishes, mixing it up. And we know that's the type of forward the Blackhawks want him to be. He really put it all together to make a huge impact in this game last night. Led the Blackhawks with 6 hits. Also got in a fight with Blues defenseman Logan Mailloux. And at that point in the game, that was still when the Blackhawks were down 2-0. They were kind of just starting to ramp it up. But I really do feel like Dach's fight and that energy that he provided the rest of the group, I really do think that played a part in them elevating their performance the rest of the way. And then, of course, in one of the weirdest sequences you'll ever see, I think this was like so textbook preseason hockey. Everyone, even the officials, I think, kind of just getting back into the swing of things here. Colton Dach, with just a couple of minutes left after the Blackhawks managed to tie this game 2-2, delivered a huge center ice hit on Oscar Sundqvist for the Blues, who was carrying the puck through the neutral zone. Well, that forced the Blues into committing a turnover. It also kind of, I think, took their attention off of the play that was going on. They all immediately skated over to Dach. A skirmish ensued, but interestingly enough, the officials never ended up blowing the whistle. Oliver Moore goes and gets a stretch pass from Connor Murphy after Dach committed that hit, and Moore races into the offensive zone and roofs a wrist shot home to put the Blackhawks ahead 3-2. Now, I feel like with the skirmish happening, there probably should have been a whistle there from the officials, but hey, we're certainly not in a position to complain, but none of that would have happened. That game-winning goal, that sequence all started with Colton Dach's physicality and a huge hit from him in the neutral zone. So altogether, that's the type of stuff we know Colton Dach possesses. And not many others, maybe, Nick Foligno can be a physical presence and step in and fight every now and again. But the Blackhawks don't really have that in their NHL group. And I've said time and time again, because of, Dach's, just accidentally unplugged my laptop, just because of Dach's size and how aggressive he is on the ice, not afraid to hit anything or mix it up with anyone. I really do think that just fills a needed hole in the Blackhawks forward group, and why I firmly believe he's going to wind up on this NHL roster, probably going to be in the lineup on opening night against the Florida Panthers. And I felt like he kind of cemented that with his showing last night against the Blues. Huge impact made by number 34, Colton Dach. Also, Oliver Moore, I just referenced an incredible shot for the game-winning goal with just over 4 minutes left in regulation. Moore's speed is just so obvious every time he's in the Blackhawks lineup. He had used his wheels a couple of times earlier on in the game to chase down loose pucks, win a foot race to get there first, but just wasn't able to get like a strong enough shot off on net. A couple of times the Blues were just able to get there and get the stick on the puck in order to deflect it. But finally, Moore being in the right spots, utilizing his wheels, paid off there in the third period with the game-winning goal. And altogether, just because of his speed and also the hustle and how driven he is to provide an impact in all three defensive zones, it's easy to notice Oliver Moore every time you watch him. And I thought he had a really good performance last night and showed this Blackhawks coaching staff that speed kills, and he's probably the fastest skater in this forward group on the Blackhawks. Also got to give a shout out to the third member of that top line for the Hawks. Ryan Green probably wasn't as noticeable, in my opinion, as Colton Dach or Oliver Moore, but I did think, he did a good job in a center ice position, had a real good opportunity in the first period to get the Blackhawks on the board that just got stopped by Jordan Binnington, but won 60% of his faceoffs last night, plays a responsible two-way game, and I've thought it's been interesting since both he and Moore arrived in the NHL late last season. It just feels like the Blackhawks are a little bit more committed to Ryan Green as a center iceman, whereas Oliver Moore, I think they want to be using him on the wing. I can see why they've kind of gone that way, just because Ryan Green has done a really solid job at the faceoff dot. But with Dach, Green, and Moore all having strong performances here last night, all three of those guys are right on the bubble for the NHL roster. I think there's some tough decisions that are going to have to be made by Jeff Blashill and the rest of his staff in terms of who winds up making it to the NHL, who starts the season with the Rockford Ice Hogs. It's going to be a very interesting battle over these next 9 days before the regular season kicks off against the Panthers. Also, Lukas Reichel, maybe the most disappointing Blackhawk in the preseason opener against Detroit, just because of the opportunity that he was given, along with Connor Bedard on the top line. Wanted to see those two play with a lot of pace and lead the Blackhawks offense, only for Reichel to be a ghost for a majority of the game. Well, that certainly wasn't the case last night. Kind of in a similar way to Martin Misiak, even though Lukas Reichel didn't wind up on the stat sheet, I thought he was one of the most dangerous forwards for the Blackhawks. I thought his speed was super evident when he was carrying the puck through the neutral zone and made a lot of nice plays. Had a couple of grade A opportunities in the bumper spot for the Blackhawks on the man advantage that unfortunately just ended up getting stopped. But altogether, that's what we want to see from Lukas Reichel. That's what Jeff Blashill needs to see in what's been deemed a kind of make or break training camp in preseason from Reichel. If he keeps that up, he's definitely going to have a better chance of squeaking into the lineup for that regular season opener. A couple of not so great takeaways that I wanted to get into here as well before diving into segment two. It wasn't all glitz and glamour for the Blackhawks last night against the Red Wings. There were a couple of players who struggled. In particular, I thought it was another tough game for Ethan Del Mastro, even though, interestingly enough, I saw he finished like third or fourth on the Blackhawks game score chart. Defensively, he struggled once again in terms of his coverages and letting guys get by him backdoor. Not a great play or play recognition from he or Connor Murphy on the Blues' second goal of the game. I did think Del Mastro, like I said, got a little bit better as the game went on, but still not the type of showing that he was looking for when he's kind of on the bubble of making the NHL roster. The Blackhawks, it looks like they've been giving him the opportunity to prove that he belongs, but I don't think he's been very good in either of his first 2 preseason games, which is a bit disappointing. The top pairing on the back end for the Blackhawks last night was Kevin Korchinski and Nolan Allen, who I touched on just a couple of days ago when the Blackhawks first broke into their quote-unquote NHL and AHL groups for the first time. Korchinski and Allen, kind of unsurprisingly, were with the rest of the guys who are expected to begin the season with the Rockford Ice Hogs. However, Blashill did mention that he wanted to give those guys, an opportunity to practice with Group 1 and also get some opportunities along with them in preseason games. I thought Korchinski and his speed was noticeable last night and made some nice passes to turn defense into offense, but it was almost very similar to the preseason opener. Like, there was just nothing that wowed me or really stood out about his game. And I kind of felt the same way about Nolan Allen. Quite honestly, I didn't notice Nolan Allen too much last night, which, isn't always the worst thing for a defensive-minded defenseman. But again, just considering the position they're in, and they really need to kind of wow this coaching staff at this point if they want to be part of the NHL group, which I know is very unlikely. But, if they dominated on the back end and put together an incredible performance last night, certainly wouldn't have hurt their case and would have helped them get closer to that goal. But I don't think there was enough shown by either of them last night to kind of change the mindset around where they're going to start the 25-26 campaign, me personally at least. And then Nick Lardis. I thought Nick Lardis had a really good final 30 minutes when the Blackhawks really started to get it going. But his opening 30, first little bit of action in the preseason, I thought was a bit shaky. Had a couple of turnovers when trying to exit the defensive zone. And I just kind of felt like he was trying to do a little bit too much. And he also had a wide open net for a one-timer on the power play late in the second period that he missed by like 10 yards wide right. And that's usually Nick Lardis's, that's right in his danger zone. So, like I said, I did think he got better, but wasn't, the greatest first period or opening stretch of the second period from Nick Lardis, but altogether no real horrible takeaways or anything from this Blackhawks game last night. Awesome fight shown by this group to not quit, not back down. We've seen that happen to the Blackhawks so many times over the last couple of years. And yeah, look, I know it's only the preseason, but I did think it was noteworthy that a group of, again, not really many NHL guys against most of the regulars for the St. Louis Blues never backed down, strung together some momentum, and wound up stealing a win for their first victory of the postseason. We'll see if the Blackhawks are able to keep that momentum going here tonight when they're back in action against the Minnesota Wild. I'll dive into the Blackhawks projected lineup and starting goaltender for that game here in just a moment, Blackhawks fans. But first, real quick, I do got to talk to you all about FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Because right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use all across the app. And what I personally love about FanDuel is that it's super quick, it's easy, and the best way to add a little more energy to your Sundays. With player props, same-game parlays, and more ways than ever to get in on the action, are you ready to play? All you got to do is download the FanDuel app now or go and visit FanDuel.com today in order to get started. Again, that's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet and get $300 worth of bonus bets when it wins. Real quick, Blackhawks fans, just a reminder to go and smash that like button down below and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube if you're enjoying what you're watching here today. And if you're tuning in through an audio platform, please make sure to go rate and review the podcast. It's 100% free, will not cost you anything, and really helps me out in a massive way in growing my show. But segment 2 on today's episode, the Blackhawks are back in action for their back end of their weekend preseason back-to-back, 5 p.m. Central Time puck drop tonight at Grand Casino Arena in St. Paul. It's actually the final road game here of the Blackhawks preseason. They'll be back in action for their first preseason home game at the United Center on Tuesday against the Detroit Red Wings, and then have another contest against both the Wild and the Blues the following weekend at the UC as well. And I understand, Blackhawks fans, that I'm recording this at 11 a.m. Central Time. This isn't going to have the greatest shelf life in terms of an episode, but definitely had to touch on all the key takeaways from that awesome 4-2 comeback victory last night in St. Louis. always feels good to beat the Blues, even if it is the preseason. But wanted to touch on what we can expect to see for the Blackhawks lineup here tonight against the Wild as well. And unlike last night against the Blues, where, like I mentioned, yeah, they had Mikheyev, they had Murphy, they had Dickinson, they had Grzelcyk, along with some bubble guys like Dach and Moore, Del Mastro, Ryan Green was in the lineup as well, but just compared to what they were facing with the St. Louis Blues, I mean, a lot of their regulars, their starting goaltenders, their legit best prospects in the organization. Well, things are actually going to flip in the Blackhawks' favor here tonight, as we're expected to see most of their NHL group, while it looks like it's going to be a young AHL-filled lineup for the home side Minnesota Wild. Breaking it down for the Blackhawks, they actually didn't have a morning skate down at Fifth Third Arena before heading on out to St. Paul. But considering who the Blackhawks announced as part of their roster, I think it's pretty straightforward and easy to guess what the lineup is going to look like. Serving as the top line, Ryan Donato and Andre Burakovsky are both set to make their preseason debuts, while Connor Bedard is going to be playing in his second preseason game, serving as the top line center. No real surprises there. This trio has been together for a majority of training camp thus far. Now get their first opportunity in game action to show how they look with each other. The second line, no surprises here either. They've been together legitimately through all of camp, even the day where the Blackhawks broke into two groups and were kind of more focused on their power play and penalty kill stuff that day. Well, they still made sure to put Tyler Bertuzzi, Frank Nazar, and Teuvo Teravainen together. Probably going to be the top six forward group for the Blackhawks in their regular season opener, unless something drastically changes here over these next 9 days. Serving as the third line for the Hawks, Nick Lardis is going to be back in the game tonight for his second preseason contest, while Ryan Green and Oliver Moore are playing their third in a row, also playing both games of this weekend back-to-back, like Nick Lardis is, but they, of course, were also in the lineup for the preseason opener against the Red Wings. I'd anticipate that this is going to be the third line with one another, just a prospect-heavy trio or young player-heavy trio, with Lardis being the wing. I'm thinking Ryan Green is going to be in that center spot once again, while Oliver Moore is probably going to be in the right wing position. And then down on the fourth line, a couple of prospects who have been injured recently in training camp, and Samuel Savoie and AJ Spellisy are both going to be making their preseason debuts. Savoie going to be beginning the 25-26 season in the AHL with Rockford, but I always love watching this guy play. He's a true pest out there, loves getting under guys' skin, kind of going to fill into the Colton Dach role for the Blackhawks tonight, even though he's much shorter in stature than Colton is. And then Spellisy is another big boy who can provide some physicality. Lots of good stuff from him during training camp and the preseason this time last year. He'll be making his preseason debut here tonight, as Blashill told me when I asked about this on Friday at training camp, and then he'll likely be returned to the Windsor Spitfires in the OHL. Nick Foligno, the captain, is going to be in the lineup for the first time during the preseason. I expect him to center this fourth line along with Savoie and AJ Spellisy. Then on the back end for the Blackhawks, it's going to be an extremely young group. No Connor Murphy, since he was in the lineup last night, and he's really the only true veteran of this blue line these days. It looks like it's going to be Alex Vlasic and Sam Rinzel, who have been reunited as the top pairing recently in practice, mostly due to Del Mastro's struggles during the preseason. Wyatt Kaiser and Artem Levshinov are going to be back as the second pairing. Kaiser scored a goal for the Blackhawks in his first preseason game on Tuesday, while Artem Levshinov, I didn't think he had a very good performance, and I also don't think he's looked really good throughout training camp thus far. So this is a pretty meaningful game for Artem Levshinov if he wants to be a full-time NHLer. If it doesn't really go well, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if he opens up the season with Rockford, considering the way he's looked up to this point. And then on the third pairing, the two guys that served as the top pairing for the Blackhawks last night, Kevin Korchinski and Nolan Allen, are going to be back in action. For Korchinski, it's his third preseason game. They're giving him all the opportunities to win this staff over, and I really do think he's playing again tonight because Del Mastro struggled once again, and also because Artem Levshinov has not looked that great. So maybe that opens up an opportunity for Korchinski. I'm still not expecting it to happen, but like I said, sure seems like they're giving him the chance to win over this Blackhawks coaching staff. And also, as a former 7th overall pick, right, you want to continue to give him these opportunities to develop and showcase his stuff in front of the big league staff. And then in net for the Blackhawks, Drew Commesso is going to be making his first start of the preseason, going to be the number one goaltender in the AHL for the Rockford IceHogs once again this season. Excuse me. That was terrible. While Arvid Soderblom is set to serve as his backup. Soderblom, of course, got the nod in that preseason opener against the Red Wings. Super excited to see how Drew Commesso is going to look, as well as this Blackhawks mainly NHL group for the first time here in the preseason. On the flip side for Minnesota, looks like it's going to be mostly AHL guys and some of their top young players. From what I saw, the really only noteworthy NHL guys in the lineup are Marcus Johansson, Marcus Foligno, who's the younger brother of Blackhawks captain Nick. Always fun when they go up against one another, as well as Chicago natives and both former Blackhawks, Vinny Hinostroza and Ryan Hartman. Outside of those four, not a whole lot of true NHLers for Minnesota tonight, but they will have some notable prospects like Zeev Buium, who's one of my favorite prospects in the entire NHL, along with Danila Yurov, Liam Ogren, David Jiricek, and Carson Lambos in the lineup as well. No official confirmation in goal for the Wild, but I'm guessing it's going to be Philip Gustafsson. They listed him on their roster, and he's yet to make an appearance so far in the preseason, so I guess it's going to be he versus Drew Commesso tonight for the goaltender matchup at Grand Casino Arena. There is everything to note before the puck drops tonight at 5 p.m. Central Time between the Blackhawks and Wild. Coming up in just a moment, before I wrap things up, still need to quickly break down the Blackhawks' latest training camp roster cuts. Real quick, just wanted to say thank you to everyone for making Locked On Blackhawks your very first listen here to start off your day. For your second listen, make sure to go and check out the Locked On NHL podcast, where there is no off season, bringing you the daily league-wide stories that matter the most with the local coverage you love from Locked On. And you can easily find Locked On NHL now on YouTube or wherever you may be listening to your podcasts. Segment 3, both on Saturday and Sunday, the Blackhawks made another round of training camp roster cuts, trimming their roster down, and it makes sense timing-wise because the Rockford IceHogs, their AHL affiliate, are actually set to open up their training camp down at the BMO Center in Rockford on Sunday morning as well. So the guys who the front office and the coaching staff know are going to be part of the AHL group, might as well send them back down to Rockford now to kickstart their training camp together as one unit. We saw 7 players first get reassigned as part of the second wave of roster cuts on Saturday. That included Brett Seney, Kevin Fitzgerald, Andrew Perrott, Paul Ludwinski, Tage Harding, Dmitry Kuzmin, and Ryan Mast. I don't think there's really any surprises there. All pretty clearly going to be NHL guys. Brett Seney, been the captain for the IceHogs the last couple of years. Paul Ludwinski, maybe the most noteworthy prospect of this group, considering he was a second-round pick, but hasn't really been the best start to his professional career. Didn't make much of an impact with the IceHogs last year. I will say, though, Tage Harding, big body defenseman who I thought looked pretty decent along with Sam Renzel at the Tom Curvers Prospect Showcase. Had 4 assists, I believe, in his first 7 AHL games with Rockford after he inked his entry-level deal following his senior season with Providence. So I'm excited to see how Harding's going to look in his first full pro season, and we'll see if whether Paul Ludwinski is going to be able to take a noteworthy step in his development. And then on Sunday, the Blackhawks assigned 4 more players to Rockford, and Jackson Cates, who, like Kevin Fitzgerald and Andrew Perrott and Ryan Mast, are currently under AHL deals with the Rockford IceHogs, so that makes sense. In addition to Gavin Hayes and Martin Mishiak, who both were excellent, along with Dominic Toninato on the fourth line to really help drive that Blackhawks comeback victory over the Blues. I think they're going to be taking some good momentum with them to open up IceHogs training camp, and Rockford also has a couple of preseason games going down next week. And then last but certainly not least, Stanislav Berezhnoi, who's going to be Comesso's backup to open up the 25-26 season. A little surprised the Blackhawks didn't give him a preseason NHL game, but likely going to be coming at the AHL level with, as I just mentioned, those 2 IceHogs preseason games that they got this week. But following those 11 players now being assigned to Rockford, the Hawks training camp roster is down to 38 players, including 21 forwards, 12 defensemen, and 5 goaltenders. And I think we'll probably see another wave of cuts following this weekend back-to-back on Monday morning that'll probably trim the training camp roster right down to 32 or 33 players. But that's going to take care of today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks, everyone. As always, thank you all again for joining me on the show. Be sure to subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube and follow Locked On Blackhawks for free wherever you may be listening to your podcasts. I'm your host, Jack Bushman. If you want to check me out on X, you can do so at Jack Bushman2, but make sure to follow my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey for all the latest Blackhawks news and updates. So until tomorrow's episode, everyone, I'm gonna press the right button this time. I'll see you next time on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.